If I told you that masked secret police were caught on camera kidnapping a college student for her political views, you'd probably think that it was happening in some foreign country run by a dictator. But this was the scene on Tuesday night, not in a foreign country, right here in America. In fact, in Massachusetts, the birthplace of the American Revolution. That is where a Tufts University PhD student and a Fulbright scholar was abducted. Rumaisa Ozturk had just left her apartment to attend a dinner, breaking her Ramadan fast, when all of a sudden she was approached by a guy in a dark hoodie and a hat who then grabs her hands, and you can see and hear how upset and scared she was as an officer finally pulls out a badge and appears to identify himself as law enforcement. Within seconds, she is surrounded by half a dozen cops, all in street clothes and all covering their faces with masks. They take her cell phone, physically remove her backpack. And her crime, you'd think that this was somebody really wanted by the government, someone dangerous, but her crime appears to be co-authoring an op-ed in the school newspaper back in 2024. The piece cites Tufts University's 1989 decision to divest from apartheid South Africa as part of an international boycott against that racist regime. She calls on the university to divest in the modern era from Israel due to the International Court of Justice finding Israel plausibly committing genocide. And for that opinion, for that op-ed, Ozturk was essentially kidnapped off the street. She was sent to a detention center in Louisiana, with the Trump administration now hoping to deport her out of the country. If it sounds familiar, it is. In fact, it is a similar story to that of Mahmoud Khalil of Columbia University. And it happened to a number of other foreign students across the country, again, with no evidence made to the public. The Department of Homeland Security is accusing her of engaging in activities in support of Hamas. You know what? Her op-ed didn't even mention Hamas. While DHS carries out the abductions, it is the Secretary of State who's officially making the call on who and why these students are abducted off of the streets and tried to be deported. This was how Marco Rubio explained his abduction on Tuesday.
Oh, we revoked her visa. It's an F1 visa, I believe. We revoked it, and here's why. If you apply for a visa to enter the United States and be a student, and you tell us that the reason why you're coming to the United States is not just because you want to write op-eds, but because you want to participate in movements that are involved in doing things like vandalizing universities, harassing students, taking over buildings, creating a ruckus, we're not going to give you a visa. If you lie to us and get a visa and then enter the United States and with that visa participate in that sort of activity, we're going to take away your visa.
And to be clear, there's absolutely no evidence that this young woman has engaged in any of the activity that Marco Rubio has just talked about. She has not been charged with any crime from the Department of Justice or any prosecutors. Keep in mind that Republicans have been pretending throughout all of this to be the champions of free speech in America for the past few years. In fact, this was Marco Rubio at CPAC back in 2022.
There's now a speech code, right? Every single person in this room and the overwhelming majority of people that you know are one word away. It doesn't matter if you're 13 years old when you said it. You're one word, you're one statement, you're one retweet, you're one like away from destroying your life. There are kids in America that have had their admissions to a college revoked. There are now certain things that you're not allowed to say on a college campus.
Wow. But beyond the hypocrisy of Marco Rubio, there's another huge flaw in what the Trump administration is actually arguing here. They're citing a rarely used Cold War law that says that a Secretary of State can deport non-citizens if their activities pose a potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequence. First of all, it's obviously laughable that student protesters or op-eds in student newspapers pose a serious threat to U.S. foreign policy. Honestly, we'd be much better off if these protests actually had any kind of impact on our foreign policy. But there's another huge flaw in what Marco Rubio and, by extension, Donald Trump are saying. The Columbia student encampments, which Mahmoud Khalil was a part of, they actually took place in the spring of 2024. You know who was president at the time? Joe Biden was the president. Rumaisa Ozturk's op-ed, that was published March 26 of 2024. That was when Joe Biden was president. So think about this argument for a second. Is Marco Rubio seriously arguing that the Trump administration is abducting and attempting to deport these students for undermining Joe Biden's foreign policy? Didn't Donald Trump oppose Joe Biden's foreign policy? Didn't Marco Rubio? I know I certainly did on this show. So what's really going on here? Why are these students being targeted? It's pro-Israel groups such as Canary Mission, Beitar US, and the Miriam Adelson-backed Maccabi Task Force that are behind these abductions. And they're proud of it. Beitar US is described in today's Washington Post as a militant Zionist group that's been around for a century. They are so extreme that even the Anti-Defamation League, which supports the detention of Mahmoud Khalil, they list Beitar as a hate group that openly embraces Islamophobia and harasses Muslims online and in person. But it's not just Muslims that Beitar attacks. In February, Beitar targeted Jewish professor and author Peter Beinart, posting on X that if anyone sees Beinart on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, they should give him a pager. Sick stuff. Beinart responded, "Oppose my ideas all you want, but when you urge people in my neighborhood to give me a pager in the wake of Israel's pager attacks in Lebanon, that sounds like a death threat." This is the militant group that took credit for Mahmoud Khalil's abduction and claims it has sent thousands more names to Trump officials. This is the kind of group aiding the Trump administration in what Massachusetts Congressman Stephen Lynch and New York Congressman Dan Goldman both compared to Gestapo-like conduct, referring to the Nazi secret police. But these Gestapo tactics aren't happening in a foreign country, not in a bygone era. They are happening right here in the United States today. And the Trump administration is promising more to come unless we do something about it. Mahsa Khanbabi is Rumaisa Ozturk's attorney. She joins me now. Mahsa, thank you so much for joining us. First of all, as Rumaisa's lawyer, has the government been honoring her right to an attorney? Have you had a chance to speak to her, to access her throughout this ordeal? And what can you tell us about where she is and how she's doing this evening?
Good evening, Ayman. Thank you for having me on today. Unfortunately, it's been difficult, to be honest, to communicate with my client. We had incredible difficulty at first in even finding her. It took nearly 24 hours to learn that she was in Louisiana, despite the judge's order not to remove her from the state. And then it took another 24 hours to be able to communicate, the same 24 hours to communicate with her then. And she was incredibly exhausted. It was difficult to speak with her. And even since then, it's been difficult to talk with her by phone. She's unable to give me a call when she normally should have the authorization to call me. So we are concerned about what conditions she's facing in the detention center and her ability to reach out to family and counsel.
Let's talk about the, underlying principle of her detention per the American government, this administration, and this point that I made in the introduction about how disingenuous it is for Marco Rubio to be claiming that these students were somehow undermining American foreign policy. When the conduct in question actually occurred under President Biden, is it just a case of them being disingenuous? Or might that hypocrisy actually help the students in the court system?
I mean, I think it's absolutely ironic that the Secretary of State was talking about, we're one word away, when the one words away that Rumaisa was the equal dignity and humanity of all people. That's what she wrote in her op-ed. And then to try to backdate, to retroactively apply someone's speech is just absolutely unconstitutional. I've never seen anything like this before. In fact, one of my neighbors was telling me today, I feel like we're on a different planet. This doesn't feel like Earth.
Yeah, it seriously does not feel. It certainly does not feel like America, as far as I've known it. All of these abductions of these students, foreign students, including Mahmoud Khalil, who is a permanent resident here, have led to questions about who in America has what rights and who the Constitution protects. I want to show you and our audience a clip of former Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, a conservative icon, who was asked specifically about the First Amendment and who that applies to. Take a look.
To whom does the First Amendment apply? Do undocumented immigrants have the 5 freedoms?
Oh, I think so. I think anybody who's present in the United States has protections under the United States Constitution.
One of the most conservative justices in this country's history, and in this case, he was talking about undocumented immigrants. Just to be clear, undocumented immigrants having these rights. Your client has a student visa, was here legally, Mahmoud Khalil, here legally. What residence, in your interpretation, what rights do people have here on student visas when it comes to the issue of free speech or other sanctioned activities?
I absolutely agree with the former Supreme Court. And, you know, obviously students are here to learn. They're here to communicate, to advocate, and in fact, Rumeysa was a teacher. She's an educator, and it's all about communication, learning from one another, getting to know one another. And actually, that's one of the biggest reasons I fear that we're having these problems in America is because people are afraid of one another. We don't have the opportunity to get to know each other and learn from one another and to then accept what people have to say. And we might not agree with it. And in fact, that's why Rumeysa has been targeted. We talk about free speech, but when it comes to free speech about Palestine and the genocide that we're seeing right now, it's a different story. If she were advocating for Ukrainians or climate change or reproductive women's rights, would this have happened to her now? Probably not. But unfortunately, on the track that we're going down, where all the guardrails that we've had on our government seem to have just broken off, I'm afraid that those types of advocates are also going to face future problems. And what's going to happen? Are they going to be picked up and kidnapped off the streets like Rumeysa was? I'm really concerned about what we're seeing.